Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. Raising children is daunting, but raising children with special needs often brings a new set of challenges. With days often filled with doctor's appointments, meetings with educators, handling outside caregivers and therapists, and caring for other children, parents may find themselves depleted and their marriages strained. But there is hope. The demands of caring for children who have medical conditions, developmental or cognitive delays, disabilities, behavior issues, or are on the autism spectrum or have other special needs can stress marriages to their breaking point, says co-author Gary Chapman. That's the bad news. The good news is that caregiving parents who know about and implement the love languages say they are a simple and effective way of filling a spouse's love tank and reinforcing the glue that bonds them together. Joining us now is Jolene Philo, Master's in Education. She's the author of 5 resource books for special needs community. She wrote A Different Dream for My Child, Different Dream Parenting, The Caregiver's Notebook, and Does My Child Have PTSD? She co-authored Every Child Welcome, a ministry handbook for including kids with special needs with Katie Weatherby. During her 25-year career as an educator, Jolene collaborated with special education teachers to mainstream children in her elementary classroom. She left education in 2003 to become a writer and a speaker. Joining us now to talk about the new book, Sharing Love Abundantly in Special Needs Family, the 5 love languages for parents raising children with disabilities, is the co-author, along with Dr. Gary Chapman, the author, best-selling author of the 5 love languages, is Jolene Philo. Jolene, welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're honored to have you. Excuse me. Jolene, your journey is really quite a beautiful one. Your heart for special needs children. I was a elementary education major with a special needs emphasis at Penn State University with a Bachelor of Science in Education with a special needs certification going back to the early 70s. I taught for 6 months. I didn't like it. And I got a job offer to move to New York and took that, and the rest was history. I often tell people that the reason that I chose education was because the ratio of men to women was 900 to 1. And I thought it was the best chance I had of meeting a girl, because all my friends were in engineering and business, and there were no girls in engineering, and there were fewer in business. And so education was the way to go, and I guess it wasn't a very highly academic motivation that drove me to it, but I did love kids, and I did have a heart for it. It just really wasn't a calling for me. It was I learned a lot, and now as a biblical educator, many of the principles that I learned have been applied in teaching the Bible for over 20 years. So all of that not wasted. You have your own journey. Both your journey to faith and your calling to the special needs community. Take us back to the early days of Jolene as you were growing up, and what were the influences? What motivated you? What grabbed you? When did faith come into your story, and how did it become personal?
Well, I was actually raised in a caregiving family. My father was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 1959. When I was 2, he was 29. But my parents made a concentrated effort to take us to church, which wasn't easy in the early 60s when there were lots of steps getting into the churches. There were no handicapped bathrooms. We actually always sat in the last pew because Dad had to sit behind us in case he needed to use his urinal, because his MS kind of left him with poor bladder control. So, but we always went, and there were always people that would make sure that we got into the church. And we had it was a college town, and so there were a lot of professors, and our church was the college church. It was an Evangelical United Brethren church in Lamars, Iowa. And my parents were also very good about making sure that we went to church camp. And it was a long drive to church camp, but we went every year. And it was at one of those church camps that I became a Christian, where the gospel message was presented clearly, and I accepted Jesus Christ. How can you not accept someone who loves you so completely that he's willing to die for you? And that's really all I understood then. But I continued to go to that church up through high school and even through college, because it was, as I said, the college church, and I went to college in Lamars, and just continued to be a part of that congregation and saw that church family gather around my parents and provide support that we needed in very real ways, and that always impacted me. So that's the first part of my caregiving story. My second part is that in 1982, my husband, who I met in college, my husband and I had our first child, a son, and it was very evident soon after his birth that there was something going on, though he looked perfectly fine. He was transferred very quickly from Spearfish, South Dakota. We lived in northwest South Dakota at the time. He was transferred from Spearfish to Rapid City, where they made the diagnosis, and from Rapid City then on to Omaha, where he had surgery before he was a day old. What the problem was that his esophagus was not connected to his stomach. So, of course, that required immediate surgery and feeding tubes during the healing process. He then had a series of 7 surgeries by the time he was 5, and lots of other hospitalizations and tests and procedures. And during that time, the little town where we lived gathered around us and took care of us. But there were no other families like us with a child with so many needs. And so way back then, my desire to reach those families began, because I understood the loneliness and isolation of raising a child with special needs.
You know, as you're talking, you brought back a memory. You were born, I think, in 57.
56. Yep.
56. I was born in 1952.
Okay.
And in the neighborhood that I grew up in was a building we passed all the time. It was called the Crippled Children's Home. You know, there was no political correctness. There was no, you certainly wouldn't use that term today. The building's been renamed to something else. It's much more today appropriate. But we grew up walking by that either on our way to high school or driving in the neighborhood or riding our bikes in the neighborhood. We would, and ultimately we knew a child who we were in school with that the needs became too great for the family to take care of, and therefore Robbie went to, and you think about memories and names, and I remember his name was Robbie, and I remember him in elementary school, and then he took a turn and he got sick. It may have been polio, just not sure, but this is where the polio kids this is where they lived, because they couldn't. All the homes had stairs. All the homes were 2 stories. All the homes were. I lived in Pittsburgh. Everything was up on a hill, so there really was no way to take care of in the community, in the homes. Very difficult. So they built this special facility just for those kids. But kids don't have any understanding of that. Kids walking by. And so then we had a friend pass who had been in that home, and then it became more real, but we still didn't understand. None of us had ever been inside. None of us had ever been exposed. And so there was a great deal of things that existed you didn't acknowledge, didn't discuss, weren't brought out, weren't a concern. It was kind of in a very gray area, and especially in small town America, it was even more rare. But I can vividly remember that now. that it existed, but it wasn't talked about.
Right. And I think my family in the 60s, though I didn't realize it at the time, we were really kind of trailblazers in that, because my dad had been a county extension agent, a very gregarious man, loved to be with people, and he was determined to be out and about in the community as much as he could. So we went to high school football games. We went to the county fair. He judged cattle as long as his vision held out. You know, we were downtown shopping, and he was always out in our driveway in good weather, especially in the summer. And the kids in the neighborhood would just flock in because he loved kids and had a way with them. And they would ask about his wheelchair and how this worked and what that was for, and why he had to be in a wheelchair. And I think he raised awareness of disabilities beyond what many people did in the 60s.
Well, that kind of, you know, the influence of a father who's a trailblazer would obviously incite you to that. So faith was an integral part of your upbringing. Dealing with special needs was an integral part of your upbringing, and now you have a child who has special needs, and that becomes an integral part of your life in navigating a system that does not come with a roadmap.
Very true. You just kind of have to figure it out by yourself. I think the scariest moment for us was not when we found out our son's diagnosis and that he had to travel far away. It was probably 3 years later, after we'd gone through a lot of different surgeries and complications with him, and our pediatrician looked at us and said, you know, if I ever have another patient who has this same condition, I'm referring them to you because you know more about it than I do. Which he meant as a compliment, and we took it as such, but it was also rather scary because here we are, 26, 27-year-old parents, and this trained doctor is saying we have more experience in this than he did. And many parents of kids with special needs find themselves in that position.
One of my board members is the grandfather to a child who is one of only 7 children in the world to have ever been diagnosed with this condition. One of 7. Known worldwide, one of 7. So they're in the same position where they're doing the research and they're doing it. And she's an educator, she's a teacher, a classroom teacher, and has a child who is one of only 7 documented cases of this particular genetic disorder. And so it's a lot of prayer and a lot of support, a lot of love goes into this. So you have experience in all of this, and you recognize and realize that resources, even today, there are a number of resources available, but there are what I consider almost to be the universal diagnosis. Every kid has ADD or ADHD, and every kid is somewhere on the autism spectrum, and every kid, you know, if you're not a straight A student, then you've got something. I must have had everything as a kid. If there was a psychological, I must have had it all. It must have been ADHD. I must have been somewhere on the autism spectrum or the Asperger's, you know, because I didn't sit down, I didn't stop talking, I was in the cloakroom. I remember spending my entire elementary school life cleaning erasers, putting them through that little machine, because that was in the closet, and when you were being disciplined, they put you in the closet. And so while you're in the closet, make use of your time, clean the erasers, the chalkboard erasers. And so they had that machine. Kids are kids. And as you know, and we tend to overdiagnose and overmedicate and want to fast track an answer, but that's not really what is going on. And there's 2 levels to this. There's the child and there's the parents. And the dynamic between the parents is sometimes strained to the point where caregiving the child is taken care of, but the caregivers are depleted. They're exhausted. They are poured out. We do a once-a-month special called Hope for the Caregiver, and we have Peter Rosenberger on, who spent 30 years taking care of Gracie, his wife. You talk in the book about, of course, the love languages for parents raising children with disabilities. How did you and Dr. Chapman get kind of thrown together in this?
Well, it was kind of interesting. About 2.5, well, almost 3 years ago this time of year, we were looking at buying a new house. My daughter's son-in-law and their children live with us multi-generationally, and that's on purpose. And so we needed a different place to live, and we thought it would take forever to find what we all wanted, and we found it very quickly. And then our house sold very quickly, and everything just moved so fast. And my thought all along was, these things don't happen. God doesn't have things happen like that unless he's got something important on the other side. And so my thought was, well, I sure hope it's something like career advancing or a new book that I need to be ready for, and not one of us is going to have cancer or an illness or something and we need to be moved. So sure enough, about 3 weeks after we got moved in, we moved in January, and as you know, you get the boxes cleared away, and I was finally feeling like, okay, I can settle down and start writing again. I opened my computer and I had an email from a friend who guest blogs at my website sometimes, and she said, Jolene, when are you going to write the 5 love languages version for special needs families? And it was in this room, and I'm sure there was a light bulb that went off over my head, because it was just one of those, oh my goodness, that's a wonderful idea. I told my family that night. They said the same thing. I emailed my agent the next day. She agreed. And so she was able to pursue and figure out who the acquisitions editor was and propose this idea to him, Dr. Chapman's acquisition editor. And he emailed back and said, you know, we always, especially when we go and Dr. Chapman speaks to families about the love languages for kids, people are always coming up and asking, when are you going to write a version for families like ours? Because the principles are sound, but we need some help in figuring out how to use them in our situation. And he said, I have had to tell them, I'm not an expert on that. I don't have children with disabilities or grandchildren, so I really can't write it. So basically what he and the acquisitions editor both told me is we were kind of waiting for a person to come along, and for some reason it was me. So we worked on the idea for about 6 months till we kind of figured out where we were going with it, and then we signed a contract and started working on the book.
You know, that is, for those that don't know Dr. Gary Chapman, to have accomplished and impacted as many lives as this one man has, for him to continue a counseling practice, for him to continue to self-admit that I'm not going to write about something I don't have experience with. And that was his answer. It's on record that was his position, is that he did not feel competent. Now here's a man that's created this whole concept that has changed hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of marriages, and gave people new understanding that you know, I never knew that you thought because I didn't do this that I didn't love you. I didn't know that. So my tank has been empty because this is how I receive. This is my language. And you go, well, I would have never even thought of that because I'm a this. And we have this whole narrative where we love others like we want to be loved, because that's all we know. That's the only frame of reference we have. Well, if I like quality time, then I'm gonna, and this person is like, you know, you're encroaching on my space. You're always hanging around. You know, where what they like are acts of service, or they like something else speaks to them. You know, can't you see there's a sink full of dishes? You know, just jump in there and wash them. That's how I'll know you love me. and appreciate me when you jump in there and do that. But you're just standing around talking to me while I'm washing the dishes, and you think that's, and then showing me how much you love me. I want to throw the dishes at you.
Exactly.
So when you come into this narrative where your caregivers, you have to find within a different framework, not only to each other, but you also have to kind of figure out how your child receives love and what makes them, an agitated child who also has a condition. It only exacerbates the condition.
Right.
It can't get better when the child's upset. They could be making all kinds of improvements, but if they're in their triggers, and you don't know what they are, you don't know how to communicate, you don't know how to express, you don't know what it is, it adds to the problem. So it's really not any different than all relationships. It just has certain nuances. And one of those that you highlight in the book is something that I'm quite familiar with, of course, is the Hebrew word chesed. When we spell it in Hebrew, it's got the sound that English speakers don't use.
Do very well. Yeah.
It's the guttural ch, ch sound, chesed. But in the book, of course, it's the common use of hesed with an H. How does that relate in this case, and what does it mean, and how does it relate in relationship to parenting a special needs child?
Well, the definition of hesed is that it's a merciful, intentional love that intervenes on behalf of a loved one and comes to their rescue. So there's a couple things in there. It's merciful, so you kind of overlook the things that bug you about the person, whether it's your spouse or your child. It's intentional, and I think that's really important when we're talking about the 5 love languages, because to use them well, we have to be intentional. We have to think ahead. We have to figure out the other person's love language, and then we have to learn how to use it. And then it intervenes for that loved one and comes to their rescue. As parents, we do that all the time for our children, whether they have a disability or special need or not. We are always intervening and coming to their rescue, helping them with the things they can't yet do, and that love is a form of teaching often with our children. With our spouses, especially if you're the spouse of a child with a disability, if you're a caregiving spouse, you need to intervene and come to that other person's rescue when they are just depleted, when they have poured out and given out all they have and they're sleep deprived and they're tired and they don't know where the money's going to come to pay for the next treatment or whatever, pay the bills that just came in. We have to intervene for each other as parents of kids with disabilities. And it's a constant tag team, because as my husband and I found out with our child, one of us could be strong for a while and let the other person get what they need and get their love tank filled, and then it would flip around. And that's just a constant happening. It's kind of like when you have a newborn in your home. Life is like that. But when you have a child with disabilities and special needs, that intense time spreads over a much longer period, and the child needs that major support much longer, and sometimes for their entire lifetime. And so we just have to be constantly intentional about touching base with the spouse and making sure their love tank is full, and also that child, because as you mentioned, if their love tank is full, if they feel loved, those other behaviors will be more under control and more easy to handle.
We tend to look at the statistics, which are not very good, is that families, when a special needs child comes in to their life, often one of them decides that it's more than they can handle, and if they seek help and they go to counseling, it's great. But oftentimes they just go the route of divorce, and then they kind of just assign the burden. And we've heard stories. We know of publicly known stories where a spouse has walked out on a special needs, either spouse or a special needs child, and we find it deplorable. We find it to be reprehensible, but I think that because we haven't addressed it, because we haven't brought it out of the darkness and brought it into the light, we've relegated it to a statistic as opposed to an area of ministry, an area of concern, an area for the church to focus on, to make a welcoming home for special needs families, to implement tools and resources and education. You may not be a caregiver today, but if you have a parent at this age, my mother's 93. Okay, fortunately she's in wonderful health, but there could be caregiving around the corner. My daughter is 30, just had a newborn baby, and so we have no idea what the future holds for all of us. And there are some, maybe 65 million caregivers in the United States that are not professionals but are caregivers, and they need this as well. This applies to them as well. Sharing love abundantly in special needs families. Really, it's talking about for parents raising children with disabilities and caregivers. Really, in general, this applies to them as well. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to go down the path with Jolene about how you can share love abundantly in special need families by applying the same principles of the 5 love languages that Dr. Gary Chapman created in his counseling practice, to how to apply it in your own home, in your own life, in your own marriage, and bring joy back into a challenging situation. Now, I didn't say that this reduces the challenge or eliminates the challenge or eliminates the need, but more joyful, more love, more time of quality, more, especially in this case, more of good is better, a whole lot better than what many couples are facing right now. We're going to take a short break, and we will return with Jolene Philo, co-author of Sharing Love Abundantly in Special Needs Families, the 5 love languages for parents raising children with disabilities. We'll be right back. Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, But nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Jolene Philo, who co-authored, along with Dr. Gary Chapman, the new book, Sharing Love Abundantly in Special Needs Families, the 5 love languages for parents raising children with disabilities. Jolene Philo, welcome back to the program.
Glad to be here.
Jolene, as we dig into the book, first of all, maybe a little word of encouragement from you to our audience who has been dealing with a lot of the stresses that are put on the marriage when you have a special needs child.
Well, I would just say to you, to those parents, this isn't forever, number one. We kind of get stuck in the moment and we think nothing is ever going to change, but it will change and your life will go on. We had about 5 years of no sleep and just wondering if our son would live or die. He lived. He's doing very well now. But I think even more appropriate for many of the parents here who are dealing with long-term caregiving solutions is with the growing up with my father, who had multiple sclerosis for 38 years. And my mother was his caregiver throughout his life, the remainder of his life. And my brother and sister and I had our entire childhoods and young adulthoods involved in that caregiving too. And it was hard. There were a lot of stresses, but there was also a lot of good. And you really have to keep your eye open for the good, for the humor, for the joy, and for the people around you that come in and speak love into your life and are willing to help if we're willing to accept their help. So my encouragement would be when people offer to help you, accept their help. Have something for them to do. Make a list of things that they could do for you to make your life a little bit easier. They can't be the primary caregiver. That's going to be you. But they can do many of the things around your situation and help make your life easier and give you more space and margin to find the joy and to enjoy life.
You know, it's very, very, very well said. As in many cases, and I think especially in this particular area, I live next door to a family whose daughter has a congenital birth defect, and every day is an added day because she's already passed what the doctor said that she would live to. And she's several years past that. And the mother and father and I have had this conversation that said that you're pretty close to your daughter. You have to change her. You have to constantly do things. Have you ever seen an expiration date on her? And they said, no, as a matter of fact, we never have. And I said, well, isn't that wonderful that God doesn't put the expiration date? And so what man thinks, but they've expressed, as have others, it's hard to understand the uniqueness of each person's situation. Nobody can really understand what it is we go through. And in part, that's true. That until they have programs where you switch homes for a week and you go live in somebody else's home. Until you've walked a mile in somebody else's shoes, you don't really know what their life is like. And part of that is true, but there are things that are not unique, that actually are much more common, but are not talked about. And in the book, you identify 7 threats that can harm a marriage relationship that special needs parents often face. And maybe in our audience, there's a number of special needs parents, and when they hear this, they're going to go, oh, we thought we were the only ones. We thought we were the only ones. There's other people that are going through that. We thought. And so I think it's important that you share those.
Yes, and I wrote those. I added those so that parents would know I understand what you're going through, and you still, despite these threats, can use the love languages. And also, I'm hoping that the people around the families will read the book. People in churches, extended family members, neighbors will read the book and realize a little bit more of what the families are going through so they can start using the love languages in these parents' lives. So the threats or the strains on a marriage are time constraints, because you spend a lot more time caring for someone else than for yourself or your spouse. Financial constraints. When you have a child that has disabilities and special needs, the equipment is expensive, treatments are expensive, doctor bills, hospital bills, all of that adds up, plus the transportation and meals to and from a lot of those appointments that you have. Parents with kids who have disabilities experience a lot of guilt. Sometimes they feel guilty that maybe they caused their child to have the disability, or they're not doing enough for their child. Usually that's not true. And they also have a lot of grief. They accept the child that they have, but that child is different from the child they thought they would have when they found out they were expecting. Most parents, unless it's maybe an adoption situation, have an idea of what it's going to be like to have a child. And it's quite different often when you have a child with special needs. So they grieve those losses, and then they can feel guilty because maybe they move through those stages more quickly than their spouse, or their spouse moves through them more quickly than they do. And that can create some guilt and even some resentment between spouses. Another one is isolation. Having a child with special needs can be isolating. It's harder to get out. It's harder to find other parents going through what you're going through. And sometimes it just becomes easier to stay at home and not go anywhere. There can be geographic separation. For example, in our situation, my husband and I were about 750 miles apart when I would travel with our son while he had his treatments and had some of his surgeries. And I've talked to many families where that separation goes on a lot longer, months and months, for families trying to find treatment at major medical centers. Parents of kids with special needs worry a lot. They worry about the financial situation. They worry about what's going to happen to their child after the parents are gone. Who's going to care for their child? Or conversely, they worry about, is my child going to live? When am I going to have to say goodbye? Will there be an early death? So all those worries can be a big strain. And then finally, there often is a lack of support outside of the family. And that can be for a number of reasons. It can be because the family doesn't have time or doesn't want to let people know how much they need, or people in churches and in neighborhoods and extended family or friends don't really know what to do. They don't know know what to ask or how to broach the topic, and so they just kind of pull away. And so all those strains and threats can make it really hard for spouses to stick together.
You know, in hearing you enumerate it almost sounds like, you know, I should know that. 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 But we don't. Or we do, but we don't acknowledge it or pay attention to it, or we think it's handled because when we see them, they seem to have everything in order. They seem to have it all together. You know, but behind the scenes, like many of us, the face you see to the public is not what goes on behind, you know, the Wizard of Oz, paying no attention to the man behind the curtain, kind of situation. So there are stressors, and it's natural for there to be stressors. It's natural for, and especially when you add a faith factor, if only one of the two are people that are believers in the marriage, or either the husband or the wife, they approach it completely different from a faith perspective than having them both on board with and so that can be an area of conflict as well.
It can be, and I think, but even if both parents are believers, when you have a child who has a life-threatening illness, or you see them have to go through a lot of procedures and deal with a lot of pain, even if you're a strong believer, that is really going to cause you to question your faith and re-examine what's going on. Why does God allow this? Why should our child have to do this? And you really, as a couple, and caregivers, you don't have the time to figure that out. You need other people to come in and help speak biblical truth into your lives.
So when we look at the application of the 5 love languages for parents raising children with disabilities, how is it different in the case of the unique structure and the unique dynamics? And is there a difference in having one special needs child among non-special needs children? You have 3 children and one has a special need, 2 don't. Is there a difference in that dynamic? Is there a different application in that than there is where it's just a single child, an only child that has the need, and the parents, for whatever reason, don't have other children or choose not to adopt or foster? How do the love languages fit into this narrative?
Well, that was a question that I ended up asking about 40 different families that I interviewed, parents of kids with special needs, because we really didn't have the 5 love. They weren't out yet when our son was born. And plus, you know, I needed to find out from some people who had field tested the 5 love languages in their families. And I was surprised to find a lot of parents that were already using them and had figured out some good ways to use them. I think if you're a special needs family, you need to be more intentional about using them with your spouse and with your children, because you have less time and you have less money. So you have to be really creative about how you use them. And these families were. Another way it's different is it can be more difficult to figure out the love language of a child with a disability or special needs, especially if they're nonverbal or their developmental level is not going to make them easy to communicate with, or they have difficulty expressing their ideas. And then there are some differences too when there are typical siblings. You again have to be very intentional about making sure those children with the typical siblings get the attention they need. It's awfully easy to put all of the attention on that child who's, you know, maybe got monitors beeping all the time, or has to be transferred in and out of a wheelchair, has to spend more time on homework at night, whatever it may be. So I would say the key thing is you need to be much more intentional and focused, and you have to find easy ways to share the love languages. And they're out there, and the book is full of them.
You know, it's interesting that for our audience who's not familiar with them, the 5 love languages are receiving gifts, quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service, and physical touch. And what is kind of unique about a child with special needs is everything is an act of service.
Yes.
There's lots of physical touch, but it's physical touch that's in the performance of caregiving. So the holding of a hand or the stroking of the head, not related to the administration of outside of the context of the caregiving as an expression of love, is important to separate them, saying, well, what do you mean? I physically touch the child all the time. I'm always performing an act of service. I'm always speaking words of encouragement to them. Every bit of time I devote to them is quality time. And as far as receiving gifts is concerned, they don't comprehend what a gift is, so I don't know how to express to them through the giving of gifts. And it may very well be that a new pillow for their wheelchair, right, it is a gift in itself that wasn't in the plan, but maybe you see a response, maybe you don't. I think part of the difficulty in the application of love languages to those that cannot communicate well is you don't get the confirmation. And confirmation is an important part that you've actually hit on the right love language, the dynamic changes. And so that has to be challenging, and it's a challenge that we need to be aware of, is that it may be a little bit more frustrating, and you just have to believe that your application of it is getting through. It's like, I think it's almost the same as people sitting talking to a patient who's in a coma, and they say, don't not talk to them. Talk to them. Okay, we believe that it's going in somewhere. We believe that they're hearing you, and we get the reports. It's 7 years out of a coma. And I say, yeah, I remember movies that were playing that I heard on the television, conversations you were having with people sitting there, and they have some recall that you had no idea. So you may not get immediate confirmation or immediate feedback.
You may not, but several of the parents talked about being very observant of their children and really paying attention to how they responded when the different love languages were applied. Dr. Chapman talks about that. When your children are younger, that's one way to figure out what their love languages are. Use one for a week, use another one for another week, keep a journal of how they respond, and at the end of the 5 weeks, you probably will have a good idea. And then these parents came up with 3 questions that I think are just golden. And they were, what calms my child, what motivates my child, and where does my child choose to spend his or her time? And if you can answer those questions and really watch your child closely, even if your child's nonverbal, you will see which one really makes your child become most fully alive, makes them respond most joyfully and maybe gets the biggest reaction out of them. And you probably can then figure out your child's love language. If you can't, just like Dr. Chapman says, for babies from birth to 5, use all 5 love languages because we need them all to develop.
And so then we come to understanding the application of the 5 love languages to the child. Now we then elevate the status of the marriage, where the marriage now becomes a priority. We're now going to carve out some time to understand our spouse and realize that a happier, more content relationship eases some of the burdens of caregiving. That it becomes a more joyful experience if you are getting what you need. It's easier to give others what they need.
Yes, we always operate better with a full love tank. And really, I would say that practicing the 5 love languages with your spouse is probably what should be first. because the marriage has to be strong. The parents, who are the caregivers, have to be filled up in order to care for their children as well as they can. And so I encourage parents, and again, this book, Sharing Love Abundantly, is full of ideas, simple, inexpensive things that couples can do to show the love languages to one another. Whether it's if their physical touch is the language, while you're watching a TV show, make sure you sit close enough that your shoulders and knees are touching. Make popcorn and dip your hand in when your spouse's hand is in there, and brush your fingers against theirs. If acts of service or quality time is important, serve dessert on the fancy dishes instead of on the everyday plates. If you're going to the grocery store and your spouse loves gifts, you probably know what their favorite guilty pleasure is. If it's a certain kind of candy bar or a kind of coffee or whatever, pick that up while you're at the grocery store anyway and take it home. That's going to speak volumes to your spouse. We just have to, again, intentionality is the key. We have to know what our spouse's love language is, and then think of some simple ways that we can speak that language to our spouse.
This may sound like an obvious question, but I'm going to ask it because I think it's probably on everybody's mind. Whose responsibility is it for me to figure out your love language?
Well, if you really love somebody, if you're practicing his said, it's the intentional, merciful love that intervenes on the behalf of the other person. So we don't wait for the other person to come to us. We intervene into their life. So we should be doing that.
And we can try out the same way with the child. We can try out each one of them to see which one we get the best response to. So we actually can become investigative detectives, love detectives, and find out what it is that yields the largest response. And at times, depending on circumstances, each one of them can apply to almost all of us. You bring up two very important points I want to make sure we make. That it is not only is it important, but it's extremely helpful as a parent, for you to share with a teacher, with the school, and with therapists and the medical community that are caregivers to your child in a professional level, what it is that your child receives best, and to share that with them so that they too can maintain a certain consistency in filling your child's love tank, as you refer to it, to make it easier for them and to possibly raise the water, and all the boats go up at the same time. This is really quite encouraging and extremely well done. I ask you to open up with a word of encouragement to the parents. Now I'd like you to close with a word to the parents in regards to this book, this work, and your life's work, that they're not alone and that there is help right around the corner.
That's exactly right. My first book came out 10 years ago this month, and I wrote A Different Dream for My Child, which is a devotional for parents, because I could just see in my mind's eye that parent waiting to get a diagnosis in the doctor's office, or sitting in an IEP meeting hearing that their child is having trouble in school, or whatever it might be. And I remembered how alone I felt when our son's diagnosis came. And so my books and this book and many other books in special needs ministry are written because we know that you as parents are dealing with a lot. And we want you to know that we are praying for you. We are thinking about you. And even though we may not know your name or your face, we're thinking of you always. And more than that, God the Father and God the Son are with you too as parent and child. And they understand what you are going through and what your child is going through. And just hold on to that and know that one day you will be in eternity with them and all will be made well.
Amen and amen. Jolene Philo, co-author with Dr. Gary Chapman of Sharing Love Abundantly in Special Needs Families, the 5 love languages for parents raising children with disabilities. If you know somebody with a disability, get the book and find out how you can help them. Your church, if you are not disability friendly, if you don't have a way to incorporate the families of children with special needs into your church community, into your church family, then it is incumbent upon you to take this on, for someone to champion this cause, to be there and to look within your own neighborhood, your own community, your own faith family for families in need, and be a source of support and encouragement for them, and learn what their love languages are so that the church can minister to them the same way they would minister. It's not that this may be for the next 25 or 30 years. We minister to people every single day, not knowing how long it's going to be. And so we need to treat these families just as gingerly and generously and lovingly as we do all families. And so each one of us needs to master these love languages so that we can fill their love tanks when they're on empty. Jolene Philo, thank you for sharing this great story with us. God bless you.
Thank you so much.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.